All right, so I'm going to turn off my video and I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you'll still be able to see. I don't really know how that works. Oh, look at me. All right. Share. PowerPoint. Can you guys see PowerPoint?
Not yet. Yes.
Yeah, it started to share.
All right, let me open up.
Yeah.
All right, and then
I got it here.
great.
Your audio is a lot better now, by the way.
Okay, good.
So far,
Well,
anyway.
maybe it was my ugly face slowing things down. All right, so start from the beginning. All right, so we can go ahead and get started. The topic is all grain gluten-free mashing techniques for making all grain gluten-free beer. If you guys have things that you want to talk about, feel free. I'm just going to run down some of the things that we do. I'm going to minimize the gallery here so I can actually read it. So the challenges that we face that you might not find in other brewing is that the gelatinization is necessary for the solubility of starch. So that's not unique to us. That everybody does that. The challenge is that gelatinizing millet, rice, and buckwheat requires temperatures high enough to denature our amylase enzymes that are present in the grain. Barley, wheat, and rye are just lucky enough that they have their gelatinization and saccharification temperatures more or less aligned in the same temperature band. So more or less, their stuff wants to be beer and ours doesn't. So we have to work around some stuff there. If we were to go in hot at those temperatures, where we can get that starch gelatinized, we're going to kill our amylase enzymes. And if you don't go and get up to that gelatinization temperature, you're probably going to end up with unconverted starch and potentially low gravity. So what do we do? I've outlined for us today like 4 popular mash programs. The first one is the Lavery Method, which I know Ed uses to perfection, which is a decantation mash, and he uses no commercial enzymes. A lot of people think you can't make gluten-free beer without adding enzymes, but you can, and people have been doing it.
Correction is that lately I do actually use a little bit of enzymes, but I don't rely on them.
So what Ed is trying to tell you is that he is a cheater?
Yeah.
That's what he used to call
Oh my God!
It's fair to say I can get it to pass the iodine test, but it doesn't really ferment out nearly as dry as I'd hope. So
Right.
to get it to be dry lately, I'm even using industrial enzymes a little bit.
Okay. Well, Andrew Lavery is not. So the Lavery Method doesn't. But and then there's so the one that I'm using myself that I put together with help from people from Homebrew Talk is a descending step mash, and I use commercial enzymes. Bob, who does not appear to be here. Ed, are you able to text Bob and see if he's going to join us? Because I do have a slide here of him, and we can fake it.
Expect he's in Japan as advertised.
Oh, shoot. That's right. Okay. So the ascending step mash is something he does on his grainfather, and we'll talk about that top-level view then, since he's not here to defend it. And then hopefully JP will be here in time to talk about the single infusion mash, which he endorses, and Brian from Gluten-Free Homebrewing also endorses that one. So the decantation mash that Ed uses, adapted from Andrew Lavery, do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to just go ahead and read what I've got here, and then you can talk about the merits of it?
Well, if you like, you can do that. I can pull some slides out of that other presentation when you're finished.
Okay. So this one, as far as I know, tracing back, was introduced with that 2006 all-grain brewing tutorial that Lavery put together, who's a heck of a good guy and participated in our Q&A, which was really nice of him. And he's gone on to be a professional gluten-free brewer. So his program, and I'll talk in American terms here, his initial infusion would be at 104 for beta-glucan. He now says he doesn't do that. He's found it to be optional in the beers that he was brewing. He would now start with an initial rest of 131 degrees, and that rest is about 25 minutes. And then he would pull a decantation. So this is really the key to this. There are amylase enzymes present in the grains that we use. So he would mash for a brief while there to get them loose and active. And then he would pull off a sizable amount of his wort, throw it in a fridge and preserve those enzymes, at which point he would replace the wort with boiling water to raise it to an initial saccharification temperature of 70 C, which is 158 degrees. And that rest would be about 20 minutes. And then he would take that mash that was at that saccharification point and boil it for 5 minutes before cooling it back down to 185. So that's where he's getting his gelatinization of those grains. He reduces the temperature to 158 and reintroduces at that temperature the decanted wort, or he blends it at least to get to that temperature, to get that final rest of 149 Fahrenheit, 60 C for the Australian contingent. So it's time consuming, obviously, there. None of these are a quick method. They're all going to take some time for you compared to barley brewing. But Ed will talk about this probably a little bit, that he spends a lot of time standing over a boiling kettle. Do you want me to switch sharing to you, Ed, or do you want to talk later?
Up to you. It's your meeting.
Why don't I proceed, and then whenever we can like open up the floor type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just point the finger when you're ready for me, and I'll put up a couple slides and talk through that.
Cool. Okay, so that was Lavery's decantation mash. I put the original up there, but like I said, he's kind of changed some things with the beta-glucan rest getting thrown out. So I'll talk a little bit about what I've been doing lately. This is trial and error got me here. And I'm probably going to alter this myself in coming batches. So my initial infusion right now, I'm killing all of my enzymes right up front and just starting with a clean slate. I go in at 185. Sometimes that's 180, just depending on how I'm able to get water from my mash tun, or from my hot liquor tank into my mash tun. But at that point, I'm adding Termamil, which is, or Termamil, I've heard it pronounced. It's an amylase enzyme that's stable beyond boiling temperatures, so you don't have to worry about killing that enzyme going in super hot like that. And I'm letting that sit for about 20 minutes undisturbed. I'm not recirculating anything at that point because I've done that and it sticks if that enzyme hasn't started working on those starches. So I let it sit for about 20 minutes, and then I start descending. And for a while, I was using cold water to drop down, but I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just taking my pump and I'm running it with the lid off my cooler, and the temperature naturally begins to descend. And at 170, I'm adding Sebamyl Bal 100. And this is I'm going to strike that because it's expensive to do it this way. And I've heard, though they operate at different temperatures, effectively Bal 100 and Termamil do the same thing. And I heard that from the Termamil people, and also from Trevor here, Tyler here just now. So I think I'm going to drop that one when I run out of that enzyme, because none of these enzymes are cheap, and doing 3 layers of enzymes is really expensive. So that second step's optional. I'm going to drop it and see how it works. And if I find out that I was wrong, I'll correct myself. The main saccharification rest for my process takes place somewhere in that 150 to 160 range. And at that point, I'm adding Sebamyl L, which is happiest in that range. And I'm letting that sit covered and undisturbed for 60 to 90 minutes, at which point I'll take a sample. I'll see if it passes an iodine test. And if it does, I'll begin to recirculate and allow for 15 to 20 minutes until it begins to run clear. And I'll take another test, make sure that no starch is getting through to the kettle. And once I'm confident that I've converted, it's time to run out very slowly to the kettle on a fly sparge. So that's what I'm doing right now. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I believe Bob is doing. has done in the past. And Ed, you're probably familiar enough with his stuff that you can correct me if I go wrong here, but Bob uses 25, I think, to 30% buckwheat. Is that right, Ed?
Varies, but into that ballpark, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
He's made beers with more than that.
Yeah.
Others have made beers that are all buckwheat.
I like when you get robotic on the playback or on your vocal, because it sounds like you're like a drunk robot. It slows you down.
Well, it helps because I talk pretty.
So I hope it's not happening to us.
I hear you fine.
Okay,
I'm assuming
good.
you're just jammed inbound and outbound and jammed.
So the first infusion that Bob does is at 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and he's doing a beta-glucan rest because he uses so much buckwheat that he wants to take that rest right there because buckwheat's super high in beta-glucan. And I believe at this point, in at least his well-established mash routine, he was adding his enzymes there to give them a long exposure as he warmed up to 155, which is where he would sit for his saccharification rest. And I believe he was using sub-amyl L here. I don't know about the rest of his, and I wish that we had him here to talk about it, but we'll have him add, his details to these slides whenever I post them up once he's back from Japan. I also know that he's been toying a little bit with going way out of left field, going 135 for his beta-glucan. And I don't know if he's adding enzymes at this point because then he's going up to 185 before reducing to 155. And I assume that's where he's adding his enzymes, unless he's doing Termamil. Yeah, so he's going 135 all the way up to 185 and then back down to 155. And I'll get more information from him on where he's adding his enzymes. But that's a variation he's been doing on his. But I know that he's a big proponent of step mashing in an ascending way. And then JP's not here to talk about this quite yet. But when he gets here, he can talk a little bit about it. I know that he's talked a lot about doing 164-degree single infusion using both sub-amyl L and BAL 100. And the goal here is to try and get it's sort of the happy zone for BAL 100, and it's kind of the upper end of sub-amyl L. So you're trying to get the best of both worlds and have, BAL 100 nips the ends and sub-amyl L chews the insides, if I have that correct. To me, it's magic.
The L
right.
L functions like beta amylase, and the BAL 100 functions like alpha. So
Okay.
L will leave a little bit of dextrin behind if on its own.
Okay, thank you. I knew that you guys would know that better than I would. So the goal there is that you're trying to find that happy medium where both can be effective. So you're getting alpha and then alpha that behaves like beta, and trying to get that. The issue here is that you're asking the enzymes that you're adding to do all of the heavy lifting and convert all of that starch without doing any gelatinization rest, which would have me concerned. But other people do this with great success. So, okay, so that's really all I had on outlining the three. Do you want me to share to you, Ed? Do you want to take over and talk about your process at all, or do we want to pause for questions or feedback within the room?
I recommend you pause and then tell me when you like me to proceed.
Sounds good. Anyone else? Red bar at the top. Thank you. Screen sharing is paused. I'm going to start video back up again and stop share. There we go. We're back. Hey. Okay, so we'll take a breath. If anybody wants to grab a beer, I know that was dense talk, and if anybody wants to talk about questions they might have or things that they would like to contribute, feel free. So that way
people in there that I don't recognize from prior.
Okay, do you want to do introductions? We can do it.
Yeah, well, yeah, who's new to the club? I think we should kind of touch on that at the beginning of every meeting, actually, because I'm
that's
curious to
true.
know who's who.
That's a good point. I'm Joe, and behind me is Trevor. Never mind. I can't.
For like 6 months or so, but I just
Some mishap.
Yeah, I did have a mishap. My arm brush. Connection is unstable.
JP coming here?
Yeah.
People when he gets here.
Yeah, but that's Ed asking.
Oh, that was it.
Can you guys see me?
No.
Videos.
Yeah, I lost video.
Here now.
And, oh, is it back? Start video. Yeah, I think we had an issue with the internet dropping us there. I thought it was me hitting the. Oh, look at that! It dropped the camera too. Okay.
I got your video now, but your audio is broken again. So I think you can.
I would be fine. This is JP. I would be fine just hearing everybody on audio because, you know, I mean, I'll see you all in 15 minutes anyway.
But they said they lost our.
You're coming and going. I think you're bandwidth constrained.
The audio is so much better when the video is off. It's just night and day.
Concur.
Should we kill video or what? Anyway, quick introductions. Yeah.
Introductions, maybe?
Sure.
Real quick.
That's a great idea. Yeah, thanks. Sorry. Cameron. Hi. Cameron's been in the club for 6 months online, and he's come to pay us a visit today.
This is Dana and Andrea, and we're from Carson.
Nice to meet you, Cameron.
Cool.
So
Welcome.
Dana and Andrea, we're from Carson, and he's more of a home brewer than I am, but I'm gluten free now, so we're like, hey, let's do this.
Nice.
So Dana from Carson, Washington. Yeah, homebrewer a long time. But yeah, want to learn more about gluten-free stuff, so we decided to come in, check it out today.
Thanks. Oh, Chad's coming.
I'm Chad. I've been to the group in the past, but I haven't been in since the summer. But yeah, I'm new to gluten-free home brewing. I used to barley brew like 10 years ago, but I've been gluten-free for 8 years. So just starting to learn my way through it right now.
And then the rest of them, you'll know this character in the corner.
I'm lurking. If you think you don't know me, you're wrong.
If you think you do know him, you're also wrong. And then Kurt's visiting us from PDX Brewers because he's awesome that way.
For you guys, I'm Dan from Moonshine Brewing. Oh, cool.
Oh yeah, I guess some people didn't.
Yes. So I'm not a brewer, I'm a brewer now. I brew entirely differently from everything we're discussing. So actually all these match steps are fairly new. Yeah, I did a little bit of it in brewing and decided I wasn't going to mess with it. I can do those really well efficiently, which is what we're all here from. And then up with different drugs and sugar. It works really well for some styles of beers, but it really limits my repertoire of what beers I can make. I can never make a porter that way.
You just did a porter, didn't you?
Black IPA?
I thought you did a coffee porter.
Yeah, it's not really a porter. We cover over the lack mouthful of tons of coffee.
Oh,
It's called coffee.
All right, Joe. If you like, I'll run through these slides, or
yeah, go right ahead. How do I allow you to share?
recommend you.
Share.
You don't need to share. He needs to be able to select share on his end.
Okay, so one participant can share. So yeah, I guess all you have to do is share. I thought maybe I had to give him permission. And then I'm going to stop.
No, I think it's good. Right.
Hey, I will say that there's a lot of people in the room now than the last time.
Yeah, you were here for the most sparsely attended meeting that we had. That was you and me and James.
Yep.
But you got to meet James. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Ed, are you there?
Let me know if you have that.
I can
All
see it
right.
here too.
All right, we see you, but we
Yeah, I'm here.
for a moment. All right, great.
Okay, good. So so this is a presentation. I'm not going to run through the entire thing. I gave it at Doe's last Monday, and I've posted a version of this on the Zero Tolerance page on Facebook. So look forward to your comments about it. I will skip through it. This is all background that you know of. I think one thing that Joe might talk about is the popularity of Brewer's Cleric's Clarity Firm as another approach that some people say produces gluten-free beer. It's if any conversation on the topic probably not complete without mentioning that this is in the space. The issue here is there's a lot of scientific debate about how effective it really is, and its claims are based on testing to get to 20 parts per million gluten or less. And if there was a test that was actually valid for that, then they could argue for it. But the ELISA test that the FDA uses for food, apparently not accepted for fermented or alcoholic beverages. So on two sides, it's embattled. On the one hand, it's uncertain how effective it really is, and on the other hand, it's uncertain how well the tests for gluten work in the presence of such beverages. And so the TTB, who regulates such things, has mandated this label, and they say that you know that the tests involved are. This is the reason for zero tolerance, right, Joe?
That's right.
Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's not because of any kind of border policy. It's about it's about us. You know, no, we literally cannot bring anything knowingly that has gluten in it at any point in the process to our meetings, and for that reason, the zero tolerance policy is no gluten whatsoever can be in these beers.
Yeah, everything is naturally gluten-free, right? So. And it's, you know, some people find it actually works for them, and more power to them, but I choose not to use it. So let's see, rolling forward, you covered much of this. Some details in the presentation which you can look at about grain types and issues of foam stability. But I think what you wanted to talk about is gelatinization. When you gelatinize starch, it's a way of forcing the starch to dissolve. Undissolved starch can be acted on by enzymes, but the process is slow because the enzymes only work off the surface of the starch granules. So by causing it to be dissolved, the process is significantly sped up. Gelatinization is a great word, but imagine, and this is probably a terrible analogy, but starch granules are sort of like cocoons of starch, you know, that are wrapped tightly. And as you heat it, they would absorb water and swell and expand, and eventually those changes are irreversible. They get hydrolyzed, I guess, and the bonds in there change, and as a result, the starches break up and dissolve in water. And so you have to heat starch in the presence of water to cause that to happen. And the issue is that in doing so, applying heat to get to the right temperature for the grains that we use in gluten-free brewing, you tend to destroy all the amylase or denature all the amylase enzymes. So here's a chart.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah, I think this is what you wanted to see that I put together. I would say, firstly, that I looked around the internet and found as many scientific papers as I could and other sources to come up with these temperature ranges, but starches gelatinize over a range. They call it from onset to final. And I think as you get it hotter and hotter, different starches, because there's a range of different starches in each of these grains, start to gelatinize, and you have to hit the high end to get them all. And so you can see that barley generally completely dissolved before about 150 Fahrenheit. I will speak Fahrenheit, but for our other friends, there's centigrade on the right side. Barley completely dissolved in the typical mash regime. And that's true categorically really from most of the gluten-free, or sorry, gluten-containing grains that people find in beer normally. But starting with oats and rice, like conventional wisdom is to boil rice as an adjunct, and this is why it takes a higher temperature and the presence of moisture to get. Is there a question?
Yeah, can you just say that conclusion again? The typical knowledge is to there was a glitch and your sentence disappeared.
Yeah, you're breaking up too. I'll say again that I think I'll cover it, that the temperature range for the gluten-free grains over which the starches in those grains dissolve tends to be, either entirely or at least significantly above the range where normal mashing takes place. And in fact, beyond the point at which the amylase enzymes that are naturally present in those grains have denatured. So the upshot is that, for example, with millet in this picture, it doesn't even start to dissolve until about 170 Fahrenheit. And to get it, dissolved, you're up around 190 before you don't have any starch left. And at that point, the amylase is toast. These numbers, by the way, for temperature ranges are further governed also by the moisture content in the mash. And at typical mash thicknesses, I think these are probably valid numbers, but as it starts to get very thick, you'll drive the required temperature up. And also if things like sugars are in solution and it has a higher specific gravity, it will require a higher temperature. So sometimes you'll see these numbers quoted from different sources. I'm not sure why different sources observe them differently, but categorically, I think that the moral of the story is that to get all the starch to dissolve, you need to get it hot enough with enough water. And in general, that occurs at higher temperatures with gluten-free grains. And furthermore, in general, it's after the point where amylase is destroyed. And so all the other tricks you hear us talking about today are a workaround of this problem. Are there any questions about that?
That was a great overview.
Good.
That's the devil's bargain that we have.
Yeah, Ed, that's probably the most clear I've ever heard it stated, and that makes a lot of sense.
I would also offer from past experience, that a failure to get these things to gelatinize leads to at least poor inefficiency. You'll find a lot of trouble either in the box out of health properly. That dropped down to what normal people might expect from brewing, like classical brewing, I should say, like an inch or less. And my efficiencies are now quite adequate, right? So if you're finding a lot of trub in the bottom of your fermenter, this might be a problem. The other thing I would tell you is that the undissolved starch can be really fine. And I find that if you don't do a really good job, if that's the case, if it's in there, and you don't do a really good job of getting really clear wort into your boil kettle, and some of that dusty starch or little grits make it into the boil, when you boil it, that starch will gelatinize, and you'll end up with starch in your beer. And you don't want starch in your beer because it will taste starchy, at least, and worse, that starch, while it's not fermentable by yeast, does make a suitable food source for bacteria, which can lead to problems. So for beer stability and flavor and efficiency and lots of other reasons, you really want to make sure you get all that starch dissolved. And then we have to figure out what to do about it at that point, because you won't have any amylase left. So I'll move on. Joe covered the different enzymes involved. Termamil works well, as he stated, because when you can get it really hot and termamil is still active. So termamil is an approach that seems to work really well. Joe and I have been working on it for a while, and I think it might be a really good approach. It might even be the best approach. Still feels like cheating. So Joe talked about my mashing regime. This is the way I do it, and I'm still evolving it. But I do a multi-step decantation mash. The community calls it a decantation model I published with Andrew Lavery. I do a beta glucan stop, and for some beers, I do a protein rest. I think the protein rest is probably optional. It just depends on what you're trying to do. The protein is good for head retention, so I try to avoid that often. But the beta glucan, while it also contributes to head retention, I find the foam it creates is a bit soapy. And when I use gluten-free grains with a lot of beta glucan, it can be too much. So I'll do a beta glucan rest sometimes, and I get it. The mash will run better too because the viscosity drops when you do that. Mentioned that I will use those enzymes. So here's a picture of somebody. I do a sort of multi-step mash.
It is not. It's really great. Well, it hasn't been like this. This is the worst. Is it? Are we getting feedback from these two? Ed, you're gone. If you can hear us, we can't hear you at all right now.
I just texted them. I think it's in-house.
When I'm off recording.
Hey, Ed. Hold on a moment. Or, Dan. Hey, Ed, can you hear me?
It's JP. Could you hold on for just a minute? We're trying to fix the audio. Like, I just got here to the meeting, and I'm listening to everything he's saying, and it's fantastic, and they can't hear it at all. So just hold on. Everybody in the restaurant, turn off your phones if you're on the Wi-Fi. It's all on Instagram.
Kind of an
Yeah, plus what you're saying is delayed, Joe. So.
Yeah, plus what you're saying delayed.
You know what? Everything was going really great, and then JP walked in. Can you see me?
I do.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm going to turn off our video to try and free up some bandwidth.
I lost you.
Yeah, no, I turned it off. But can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Okay, great. So, yeah, we've got Ed back. Something happened. Interruption in service there, but I think we're back, and I can see what you're sharing again if you want to start up again.
Well, how about I back up a slide? You guys got all your questions answered about this one?
Anybody have questions about this slide? If you want to speak now or forever hold. Yeah, we were talking about how you're carrying over.
I explained that in this case, I'll run the usual mash steps to, typical mash temperatures, and then I'll let the mash settle. And then I'll pull the clear liquid off, which is rich in enzymes. This is largely typical for a decantation mash, and as explained pretty well by Andrew and other sources. But that liquid you pull off never got hot enough to lose its enzymes. And I'm pulling off a liquid that's very clear, so it should be free of starch. So what I have left my kettle is starchy solution, which I heat directly until it gets to gelatinization temperatures. Here I cite 190. This weekend I held it at around 200, and it seemed to work nicely. While you're heating it on a flame, you have to be really careful not to scorch it. I destroyed a batch that way, so don't do that. You got to stir it vigorously. You also want to make sure that you break up any clumps. Got to get it evenly heated and evenly moist and to the right temperature to get it all to dissolve. I talked about this. The next thing I do is I put the two things back together. So I'll scoop hot grist into that liquid that I reserved, and I'll add the hot grist, which is nearly 200 degrees, so I have to be careful doing it. And I'll keep adding it as it drops in temperature, but I'll try to hold it until at typical mash temperatures until all the grist is in the pot. At which point it's around 152 Fahrenheit, and I'll add a little sub-amyl enzyme that I add. You don't have to do that. There's enough amylase in that reserve liquid that you can, with some patience, it'll pass the starch test, the iodine test. But I find the results are variable. Sometimes the resulting beer is very dry, and I've had it finished at 1020, so it's all over the place, and I'm not sure why. And so I add some sub-MLL because I find that I get consistently dry results that way. I choose not to add the Thermomil or Sub-Bal 100 because that will even ultimately dry beer. You know, you'll end up with a 1-0-8 really dry beer with that. With this, I get more natural finishing.
I thought you said you were adding Thermomil at the upper bound, or you're...
No, nope. I don't add any enzyme until just here, and I'll add about 1 to 2 milliliter per gallon.
Hey, Ed, what about mash? What we talk about having it was important to have a really thick mash to get your conversion.
So in my opinion, you know, thickness stability and of some of these chemicals that are involved. I think there's a trade-off between, you know, the proximity of all these things to each other in a thick mash, and the mobility and fluidity of the mash that lets you mix it well, for example. So the sweet is 1.5 to 2.0. The other thing I'll say is that, you know, I'll put 15 pounds and 6 gallons of water about at the upper limit, right? Whatever that is. And once it settles, I'll pull about a gallon off. And so there'll be, you know, 3 pounds per gallon when I'm stirring it here. Much thicker than that, and it'll start to draw the gelatinization temperature, right? And you have to get it even hotter. I'm not sure what, you know, precisely what that effect is. I found a paper, it's cited at the bottom about that. But in general, making this too thick makes it hard to stir, makes it have to hotter. And I think that's a sweet spot for what we're doing.
Thanks.
Let's see. I think that's it. You covered all these, Joe. So yeah, this is posted on Facebook. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask there or otherwise. Done.
So what about like you know, recirculating your mash and trying to get, you know, I had the hardest time when I didn't have a pump, which I just got, and getting very cloudy water. But it seemed like recirculating for a long period of time was able to mitigate that from happening. Is that something that you recommend
I'll answer
doing,
it and turn it over to Joe, because Joe. So I hand Vorloff with a quart pitcher, and I go around at least a dozen times, and I pour each time, and it takes a long time to get the grits out of it. In general, if you don't do a good job of dissolving those grits, it'll make a mess in your beer. And so I think it's important to get, you know, reasonably clear beer. Now, the turbidity can be a result of lots of things, husk bits and things. So I'm not sure that it's necessary for it to be, you know, to be crystal clear, but you need to make sure it's free of starch. I've had problems, you know, keeping that starch out of my kettle in the past, and I think that recirculating with a pump probably works great, and it certainly works really good. Right, Joe?
Yeah, recirculating with a pump works great as long as you don't go too soon and jam it, which I've done. Yeah. If you start recirculating before in my experience, I add Thermomil at a really high temperature and get things kind of viscous in there before I start recirculating, because I've tried to do it the entire time for that Thermomil rest, and I jammed my pump right away.
I found that, I'll talk about this in mine, the minimum of a 15-minute rest after pitching gives enough liquidity.
Yeah, I do 20, 30. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm moving more to 30 just because I know when I flip it on, it's going to be good.
I should add, too, that in my mash stuff, I have nothing but time because I've got all my kids because I brew when my wife's out. So I'll throw something in and I'll go watch like a Little League game and then come back and pick up where I left off. So like my brew days, it's not for speed, you know, it's for comfort. Like it'll take me 12 hours sometimes to brew a beer. It's just like, who cares, you know?
Well, you and I started that hot infusion going straight for gelatinization temperature at the expense of any enzymes, and then adding them post. And I think that might be a really good way, maybe arguably best or not best, but I think it's probably easiest. Here that you're not just infusing at 185, right? You need to let it sit at 185, so it's probably hotter water than that when you strike. And I think another concern there is having boiling water in a plastic cooler. I think you need to be concerned about that. But
so it's boiling when I transfer it, and it's not boiling for long once it gets over there and gets mixed with my mash. But yeah, it's boiling water that I'm transferring. But it cools significantly on the way there, and then once it's in there. But yeah, I'm going to probably start using a kettle wrapped in that Reflectix stuff that you showed me.
And, you know, for the good of the order,
steel
too,
kettle.
I've done some work with like reverse step mashing, like you and I did when we brewed the fresh hop beer. So I'm using a rim system, and what I was doing was trying to get all the way up to that initial strike temperature, which was like, 204. And as soon as it gets up to that temperature, it starts cavitating a lot in the rim's tube itself. And I get stuck. And so I'm moving to basically getting up to temperature, like basically pretending like I don't have a rim system, getting it up to 204, striking with the water and the mash. And then once I'm down back around like 185, then the rims tube can handle it just fine. Yeah.
Did you stop sharing it, or did something bad happen?
I did. No, I did.
It seems to me that I mean the process that you use, like I mash in a cooler like Joe does, and I think that's kind of, you know, the step down type of mash works really well in that. Add something like a grain father, I think that you could bounce around your temperatures quite a bit easier. And then the way Ed's doing it seems like from the Lavery documentation, it seems like your brew day could go for a really long time, right? So
well, no kidding, it probably cost me about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Hey, Kel, can you hear Ed real well, or does he keep doing like breaking up?
No, he's crystal clear to me.
All right, it's definitely us. I think we're gonna wire going forward because I think the Wi-Fi is just unstable here. Hopefully the recording won't sound real bad, but I think we're gonna bring like a 50-foot Ethernet cable and just plug it into their router going forward. I'm glad to hear.
If you don't have one, let me know, Joe, because I have a spare one of that length.
Ed and I have been having our own separate meeting while you guys have your technical difficulties.
We'll have the drinking meeting.
Yeah, well, you guys have each other, and we've got the beer. All right, thanks very much, Ed, for doing that. I think that the next meeting, we're going to kind of take a step back and do more like entry-level type of how to brew, but gluten-free style. Because I think that, we want to be we don't want all of this knowledge to also be a barrier to entry for a lot of people, because some of this stuff with the mashing and the malting might be a little bit advanced for first timers. So I think the next meeting, we're going to try and take a step back and do like an intro type of meeting, and talk about more basic stuff that people may have missed whenever we started up the club. Because the first meeting or two, we had, 15 or so people here and 0 online. And then we've quickly ballooned to we're closing in on 300 people now. So online. So I think we're going to take a step back and be a little more like entry level, do sort of a gluten-free brewing 101, unless anybody has something super cool and urgent that they want to talk about in meetings, and then we'll start looking forward to something that I really want to do. And I haven't talked with Groundbreaker people about it yet, but it's coming up on 1 year. In January is when we had our first meeting. I think it'd be cool to do like a 1 year anniversary thing. And I'm going to start reaching out to some of the breweries. JP and I were talking about this, and we've got a goal to try and get beer from every North American, at least, dedicated gluten-free brewery, and kind of have a little bit of a party, and kind of just have a big celebration for the first year anniversary. It'll be after Christmas, so everybody's like school pageants and all that stuff will be out of the way. You don't have to worry about all that, and your work party and your family get together and all that. It'll be January. And so if anybody has connections with any of the other folks out there, like RX, I've been trying to get in touch with them. Not super responsive in the reaching out that I've done, but I know that some members do. What's that?
We're on board.
You guys are on board. We've got a firm commitment from Moon Shrimp and from Beerly to participate. And Groundbreaker. We'll go ahead and say that Groundbreaker is going to probably at least have beer available at the gastropub.
If they say no, we'll just steal it. They let us see.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I'm assuming that Groundbreaker will be cool with it, but if they aren't, I mean, I heard that Beerly's opening a tasting room in 2 weeks. So no, and I know that Holidayly's been super awesome about sending us beer. I have apologies to everyone. Pirate Waters, they sent us a growler of their barrel-aged pumpkin beer, and it did not survive the mountain passes on the way here. Apparently the growler cracked and it died on the way here. At least that's the story that Groundbreaker guys told us. Paxton promised he didn't drink it on the way back. But he said that it broke and then it made a big mess in their cooler and it didn't make it home. So it went from, so Golden, Colorado is at like 7,500 feet above sea level down to, very low, and then all the way up here to, what are we at, like 600 feet. So, yeah. So anyway, that died on the way here. So I'm sorry we didn't get to have the Patchy, or not the Patchy Waters, but the Pirate Waters, which is the rum barrel aged version of that beer. But no, they've been great about sending beer. We know we can get Ghost Fish beers pretty easily, but if you know RX people or Burning Rose or Alt people or
Rolling Mill.
Rolling Mill is new. So this is Neil Rupp's job because he's in Columbus. So he's got the Rolling Mill and he's also got the RX connection. So that's going to be his task. He was at the first meeting, so he's zero tolerance for life now. But if you know people who are doing that, and then it'd be cool to get a bunch of homebrew here. And if people are thinking about, the reason I'm saying it now is if people are thinking about trying to get here from out of town for that, that'd be cool. Because I think we're going to probably have more gluten-free beer under one roof than you've probably ever seen.
We'll probably do homestays too.
Yeah.
I know I've got a guest room. Somebody's here from out of town. They could stay with me in McClinville.
It'd be cool to get Brian to come up and Alyssa from Gluten-Free Homebrew.
They'll be up here actually in 2 weeks. If you come to the opening of Beerly Brewing's tasting room, Brian will be here in McClinville. So
great.
Yeah. But yeah, also, okay, I'll take him.
You'll take it. So he's your homestay. But that would be fun. I'd really like to see if we could pull something together that's like, we do a good job disseminating information. It'd be cool to just kind of have a party. I know we just did that after HomebrewCon, and that was really fun. We had probably more gluten-free beer at HomebrewCon than you've ever seen under one roof, with 11 taps pouring of ridiculous stuff. So yeah. Yeah, that was also fun. So it's been cool. It's been really cool doing this over the past couple of months, and I want to see if we can get a party together and do the social aspect of it and get a bunch of beers together and, it's safe here type of situation where you all get to enjoy cool and different beers. Anything else, guys, from the peanut gallery?
If you want to do single.
Oh yeah, sorry, shoot, I launched right into that.
Yours too?
I did mine, yeah.
You did yours already?
Yep. Over here.
Yeah. Well, no, I heard it all.
Okay, yeah. JP wanted to talk a little bit about the single infusion.
All right. So, it's so meta. Okay. So,
JP.
Yes, sir.
JP, I recommend you cancel out your video if you want us to hear you well.
How do I do that, Joe? Stop video.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
No video. Is that better now?
Somewhat.
Okay. I could also call back in as myself and just do it over the phone and mute.
It's fine. I can hear you well enough, and Joe's recording it locally.
Okay, great. All right, so yeah. Oh, hell yeah, open P3. Oh yeah. Okay, so this great example. Joe's going to open P3, which is third generation of a porter experiment that I am running. It is partial grain is what we're calling it. So all of the character malts are mashed. It's a single infusion mash, and then the base malt. Look at that. Pour. Then the base malt is sorghum. This is sorghum as the base malt in this. A final version of this is going to be bottled and released, completely open source. It's in collaboration with glutenfreehomebrewing.com. The recipe will be on the back of the bottle, so there will be no question about what's in the beer. And we're really excited about it. This is version 3. We're up to version 5 at the brewery right now, but P3 is excellent. So that is using a single mash. Save a little for me. Oh, no. Yeah. So P3 is using a single infusion mash. It's a 2-hour timer on it. It is 163.4 as the temperature. So, Ed, one of the things you said is that that's below gelatinization temperature, and that is certainly true. The way that we're kind of getting around it, I think, is by just milling it very fine. And then some of you have probably seen the video that I did with, go ahead.
So JP, I would offer first that there's a range of temperatures over which they gelatinize, and depending on sorghum, it could be partially the case, right? I don't think the fineness of the grind would help you too much, but please go on.
Okay, so we are using in a 5-gallon batch, kind of over-pitching yeast, or kind of over-pitching enzymes. We're using Sebamil L and Sebamil Bal 100, and both of those are added at strike at the 163.4. What I've started doing recently is actually letting it sit without recirculating it, because I think I mentioned I'm using this on a rim system, and I have a very fine mesh filter at the bottom for my false bottom. What I've noticed is if I fire up the pump right away, it acts like a stuck mash because there's not enough liquid that's flowing yet to supply the pump and come back around through the rims tube. So if I wait 15 minutes, or really what I'm doing now is waiting 30 minutes after I pitch the enzymes in, once I fire up the pump, I have zero problem. The method for how I'm doing that too is once I strike, I shut the bottom valve of the mash tun so that the only water that's in the rims tube and the pump has no grain in it. It's all still clear water. And then once, because I'm heating the strike up with the rims tube, and then once that 30 minutes has gone past, open that bottom valve, start the pump, and I've had zero problems with stuck at that point. I've done that with the recommended 10 to 15% rice hulls by volume, by weight. I also, when Joe and I made Naked in the Hop Fields 3 weeks ago, that was about 3% rice hulls by volume, no stuck mash, which I think is down to my filter. I'm using a splatter screen on top of the false bottom, which just filters so much finer. And I think that's the reason why when there's not enough liquid, it acts like a stuck mash as opposed to just pulling a whole bunch of stuff through. So run that for 2 hours total from when I pitch the enzymes to when I begin the running, and run out with a fly sparge and boil it up and make some beer. So any questions?
Hey, JP, this is Kale. So, in your brewery, how big? What's the? I mean, you're not doing 5-gallon batches, I'm assuming. How big of the batches are you doing?
Actually, let me tell you about that. You are. It's great to assume that they're 5-gallon batches. The all grain right now I'm doing on my pilot system, which is a 5-gallon pilot system. My pilot system scales to what I have larger, so but honestly I don't have the mash tun for the commercial stuff yet. I'm doing I'll do if I do an all grain or a partial grain on a larger scale, I'll either do back-to-back mashes, or my mash tun is large enough to do a half barrel batch in my 8-gallon heavy duty mash tun. So actually I am at Homebrew scale. So everything I've said works for anybody who's brewing a 5-gallon batch.
Okay.
But great question. A great question.
So do you do the single infusion as a mechanism of you don't want your brew day to last forever, or why did you?
Yeah. So I use a single infusion for a couple different reasons. One, kind of the backstory of my brewery. I started home brewing back in 2007 with my father-in-law, and I was diagnosed with celiac disease in 2010. That's 6 months before Groundbreaker opened, a long time before Browse and before Eckert started making anything. And so a lot of my early homebrew experience was without grain. And now I'm putting them in there for better taste, flavor, frankly, and I'm able to do a wider variety of beers by using it. But I'm also doing a single infusion mash because I'm really interested in repeatability. It's fun to have a 12-hour brew day and all of that, but also like things change from brew to brew, and I'm trying to just do it the same way every time so that the beer comes out the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So do most of your beers have sorghum syrup in them, or do you do all beers that are 100% all grain or
it's a little bit of everything. It's what tastes best. The big ones right now, the big commercial ones are all syrups. The porter and I've got a couple others after the porter coming out are going to be partial grain. So sorghum is the base malt, but then character malts as the extra, as the ingredients that get me to different styles that I can't approach with sorghum. I do have some beers that are all grain. Right now they are tasting room only because they're also way more expensive, and I can afford to sell those beers at retail in my tasting room. I can't afford to sell them at wholesale in the bottle. And I do homebrew for myself and on the pilot system all grain to see what I can do. But I'm always trying to, I always have to be conscious of what I can afford to make and sell for the business, which puts me at a disadvantage to everything that we all do, that you all do as homebrewers, because the cost is a much bigger factor for me
because I'm trying to resell it then to and actually still make money and pay for everything. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for both those questions, Cal. Any other questions?
No. Thank you so much for going over that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I would say too, I put in a plug to watch glutenfreehomebrewing.com. Brian and I are going to start doing some mash trials as well with different temperatures and different enzymes, basically going one question at a time with the RIMS system just to see what we can get. Those will be all grain beers. They actually might be available in the bottle in a few places, but mostly tap room for me. And all that information. I'm really big on open source brewing and just like getting the information out there so that we can all make better beers. Because if we can make better beers, then beers are going to get better. And there'll be more options. And I love options.
So guys, I did a head count, and there's 9 of us. So I ordered 9 tasters of mine and JP's beer. So help yourself to one of them.
So thank you.
I had a question for you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you're mashing and holding it at 163,
Yeah.
165, something like that. How are you maintaining that for 2 hours?
Yes.
So this is a system you can run.
Yeah, so the system has an 1.5 inch inside diameter tube with a 5500 watt heater in it, and a temperature probe on the other end. The beer cuts out at the bottom from underneath the false bottom, goes through a pipe, which pushes it through the rinse tube, and then returns it with the ultimate Starch arm to the top of the mash. It is! Oh my gosh, ultimate Starch arm is USA!
I kind of said that to myself when I was hooking it up. Like, it's a beefy spar jar. I had this spar jar that had like
8 inch inside diameter all the way through.
It had a rinky-dink little, deflector plate on it. It had 2 weak weld points, and it kept breaking on me, and I kept like JV welding it together, and it kept falling apart, and I couldn't. Cheers.
That's very good. Thank you.
Interesting. Collaboration beer. I thought it was going to be redder. Hey guys, is there anything else that you want to need from us, or should we call to order or whatever motion to?
No, you can leave the audio open. It's fun listening to you talk, unless you don't want us here.
I'll kill the recording so that we don't say anything that embarrasses ourselves.
Yeah, I gotta run. Hey, thanks Joe and everyone for the meeting.
Kale, thanks so much for logging in, dude.
Yeah, take care, guys.
All right, see you.